is Neasa Harrigan, Green Party TD and member of the Just Transition Greens. Good morning to you, Neasa. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
So what's your take on this? Do you believe there has been political interference, to use the language of the Just Transition Greens statement last night?
I do indeed. I think there are two issues here. The opinion of various TDs on a particular planning application is one thing. It's perfectly normal for a local TD to give an opinion. However, the last week has been extraordinary on two counts. One is the call from a cabal of TDs to defund the statutory body because they don't like what it says. And the second is the intervention of senior members of the government in supporting this cabal against our own, An Taisce is our own national trust. Now, we don't dismantle the structures of our democracy as a favour to big business. That's an outrageous call, first of all. But it's also deeply worrying to see members of the government insert themselves inappropriately into a legal process. Now, we have a very difficult history in this country of politicians interfering in the planning process. We've had tribunals on it. I have to say, I'm not particularly surprised to see a Fianna Fáil minister return to the bad old days of planning interference, but I am surprised to see Fine Gael politicians adopt the tactics of the Galway tent.
Fianna Fáil TD Barry Cowan tweeted this morning that if An Taisce has an issue with government policy, they should lobby or stand for election, but don't frustrate the independent, professional adjudication of the project. Does he have a point there? Because the planning process is over, is it not? The courts process is over as well. The High Court has granted permission, so we're talking about an appeals process.
Absolutely set out in law. The role of An Taisce in the planning process is provided in Irish law and has been for decades. It does incredibly important work in ensuring adherence to environmental legislation. An Taisce has the right to appeal this decision, and it's up to the court, not Barry Cowan, to decide whether there are grounds for an appeal. It's not for politicians to be making that call. An Taisce doesn't receive government funding for any planning cases. They run a number of government-supported programmes such as Green Schools and the National Litter League, but they fundraise for their other work. So, this isn't about the cheese plant itself. This is about the political interference, fairly shameless political interference in our statutory planning process.
You mentioned the tribunals of the past, but this is very different, isn't it? There's nothing underhand here. These are open and public comments, and you're openly responding to them.
Well, I don't know if that's actually the case. It turns out that some of the loudest objectors in the Dáil actually have declared interests in Glanbia. And, I think we've seen some really kind of concerning behaviour over the last few weeks, and I would recommend people go back and watch the Committee on Agriculture last week, who invited An Taisce in to speak to them. And I have to say, I've never witnessed anything like that at a committee. The aggression and the incivility levelled at an NGO of mostly volunteers who are acting in good faith. It was an extraordinary performance from TDs who should really hold themselves to a higher standard of behaviour in public life.
Now, your Green Party colleague, the TD Stephen Matthews, he issued a statement earlier this week saying he's disappointed by the Taoiseach's comments about An Taisce, and he defended their role. But you could also look at that and say that that's interference in the same vein, in the same way that you're accusing the government politicians of doing.
I wouldn't agree with that. I think recognising a group's statutory role in the planning process and supporting that and supporting the legal process is completely different from making a comment about the case itself, which even in this interview we've been careful not to do.
Is there any milk processing plant that An Taisce and you yourself would be in favour of?
As I just said, I'm not even going to comment on the issue of the plant itself, although I have to say I would like to know from the senior politicians who are commenting on this issue and are telling An Taisce not to carry out their statutory role, which sector of society they believe should take on more than their fair share in reducing emissions, so that Glanbia and their shareholders can continue to increase their pollution and their profits with no thought to the rest of society. Or perhaps those politicians are offering to pay the emissions fines themselves, although I suspect that that's not the case, and it will be the Irish taxpayer yet again who puts the bill.
Where do you think this goes from here? I mean, your criticisms are very sharp, very cutting of your coalition partners. The government isn't going to collapse over a cheese factory, though, is it? Or is it?
I doubt very much that it is. I think what we should all do is take a step back and let the legal process play itself out. That is the way things are meant to work. That's the way the planning process has been set up. As I said, we should not be in the business of dismantling the structures of our democracy just because we don't like the way that democracy and that debate is happening. There are legal processes in place here, and we should just let them play out.
All right, Neasa Harrigan, thank you for joining us.